Good afternoon. So today we start talking about the recording industry. It's a very fascinating industry, but it's also quite complex. There's going to be a lot of definitions for this particular lecture, so please pay attention to the definitions, especially when it comes to licenses. There's a whole lot of licenses within the recording industry, and so hopefully you take good notes on the various types of licenses. So here we go. So a label or a division is any music company that finds musical talent, produces and distributes music content. It pays a licensing fee to publishers for the rights to record and distribute songs that they have rights to. And they being have rights to is I'm referring to the publisher. So the label has to pay a fee to a publisher to use um, their music or songs, I should say. So again, a label is any music company that finds musical talent, produces and distributes music content. It also pays a licensing fee to publishers, I should say. So again, it pays a licensing fee to publishers for the rights to record and distribute songs that they have rights to. And again, they have rights to referring to the publisher. ASCAP, or American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. It is a performance rights organization that began in 1914. It collects performance royalties, either live or broadcast for the artists. So let's just say an artist decides to cover a song, right? Live. So ASCAP would collect that royalty. Let's just say your song was played on the radio. ASCAP would collect the royalty from the radio stations, and we'll talk about this later. So the organization was started by artists. It grants a blanket license to things like venues and to things like radio stations. So once again, American Society of Composers and Authors and Publishers, ASCAP, it's a performance rights organization that began in 1914. It collects performance royalties, either live or broadcasts, for the artist. The organization was started by an artist. It grants a blanket license to things like radio stations and to things like, let's say, a music venue. And we'll talk about this in more detail. Broadcast Music Incorporated, or BMI. So it also is a performance rights organization this one began in 1939. So it's a performance rights organization that began in 1939. It collects performance royalties, live or broadcast, for artists. The organization was started by music executives in 1939. So ASCAP and BMI do the same exact thing. So one was started by music executives, one was started by an artist. One, BMI started in 1939, ASCAP started in 1914. But they essentially more or less do the same thing. Harry Fox Agency collects mechanical license royalties for publishers. So again, Harry Fox Agency, it collects mechanical license royalties for publishers. So anytime you take a composition, right, a song that's been written, and you turn that song into, let's say, a CD, or let's say you take that song and turn it into a vinyl, or take that song and turn it into some sort of digital song. You have to pay for every copy that's printed. You gotta pay the publisher a royalty. Okay, so again, Harry Fox collects a mechanical license royalty for publishers. Public performance rights license basically means permission to perform another artist's music or sheet music, right? So let's just say that there's a live performance, right? And some artist covers another artist's song in the concert. So the venue generally has some sort of protection, so that way the artist can go ahead and cover that song. So public performance right license grants permission to use somebody else's music or sheet music. Mechanical license. Mechanical license is permission to reproduce a song in either a physical form, like something that's vinyl, or in a digital form. So again, it's permission to reproduce a song in the form, in a physical form or in a digital form. Okay, so permission to reproduce a song in either a physical form or digital form. Blanket license, permission to perform any song for a one-time fee. This is the license that, generally speaking, radio stations and venues have to pay. Okay, so again, permission to perform any song for a one-time fee. Venues and radio stations and even television stations have to pay this type of license. So think about any sort of organization that uses a lot of music, right? And so they have to pay, generally speaking, a blanket license, a one-time fee to ASCAP and BMI to use all their music, okay, for a one-time fee. So we have here a synchronization license. So synchronization license. So permission to sync sheet music with images. Okay, so permission to sync sheet music with images. Permission to sync sheet music with images. So think about any time, for instance, you're watching a movie, and let's say the actor or actress decides to cover a song. Okay, they would the producer, the movie producer, needs to secure a synchronization license because the actor, right, is covering somebody's song, so they get and they're syncing that song with images. That's why it's synchronization. We'll talk about that later as well. Master use license. Master use license means permission to sync sheet music and the master recording with images. So permission to sync the sheet music and master recording with images. So let's just say you're watching an ad on television, or let's just say you're watching a movie, and all of a sudden this artist's song, appears in the movie, right? You hear the artist's actual voice, plus obviously you hear the lyrics of the song, you hear the words. And so in that particular case, you're using the master recording as well as the sheet music, and you're syncing it with images, right? The film or the advertisement. And so in that particular case, you're going to need a master use license, which again means permission to sync sheet music and master recording with the images. Transcription license. This is typically something that's used for, let's say, radio, for, let's say, a radio ad, I should say. Permission to sync music with words. So this is primarily for use for advertising on radio. It's kind of an old license. So music publisher. Music publisher is responsible for promoting sheet music, responsible for finding an appropriate singer for sheet music. It also collects performance royalties on behalf of the artist, or the author, I should say. So again, responsible for promoting sheet music. They are responsible for finding an appropriate singer for sheet music, and they also collect performance royalties on behalf of the author. So let me explain just a little bit what I mean by this. So a music publisher promotes their sheet music. So do you ever wonder how and why this particular song appears in an ad, or appeared in this TV show, or appeared in this movie? So oftentimes music publishers are promoting the fact that they have the rights to this sheet music and trying to convince, ad agencies or film producers or showrunners to use their music. So that's what I mean by promoting sheet music. They're also responsible for finding an appropriate singer for sheet music. So let's say you have a great songwriter, right? But maybe that songwriter can't sing, or maybe that songwriter can't sing song, that type of song. And so the music publisher goes out and tries to find an appropriate singer, right, for that particular song that's been written. And in terms of collects performance royalties on behalf of the author, I'm referring to the mechanical license up here in number 6. So the 6, but I'm also referring to number 4. So the music publisher works very closely with Harry Fox Agency, because the Harry Fox Agency is collecting royalties, and then they give that royalty to essentially to the publisher. And also the publisher is hoping to grant mechanical license, the mechanical license. Hopefully that made sense. So 360 deal. So a 360 deal is an agreement between an artist and a label, or any way possible that an artist can make money, the label gets a percentage of it. So again, it's an agreement between the artist and the label. And in this particular case, any way that the artist can make money, the label gets a percentage of it. So it's kind of a, they're working as a partnership, but it's 360, meaning it's all the way around. In any way possible that the artist can make money, the label gets a percentage of that. I don't know if that's good or bad, but generally speaking, let's just say it often encompasses four of the main revenue streams for artists. So number 1 would be touring. Again, number 1 would be touring. Number 2, songwriting. Number 3, it's the sales of either their physical records or digital sales. So one or the other, physical or digital sales, or both, I should say both, as well as endorsements. Those are the 4 big ones. But again, it's an agreement between the label and the artist, where the label gets a percentage of all the money that the artist can earn, just in any way possible. They get a percentage. And again, the 4 big ones, when it comes for the artist at least, is the touring, the songwriting, the sales of either physical sales of music or digital sales of music, as well as endorsements. So in any way possible that the artist can make money, the label gets a percentage of that money in a 360 deal. So think of a 360 deal as being, like this circle. Anywhere that the artist turns and makes money, the label gets a percentage of that. I don't know if that's, considered good or bad. All right, so a little bit of history about music. So obviously the Gutenberg press plays a huge role, significant role, not in the world of publishing, right? Whether it's book publishing or other sorts of publishing, but the other sorts of publishing I'm referring to is music publishing, right? Without the Gutenberg press, artists would be unable to essentially make physical copies of their compositions. So the Gutenberg press made music publishing a viable business. Okay, so Ottaviano Petrucci, I'm sure I butchered his name. So Ottaviano Petrucci essentially was the father of music printing. So he is the father of music printing. As a matter of fact, Petruccini had a monopoly on music printing for, gosh, I want to say like 20 years in the 16th century. So Petrucci is, I believe he's Italian. I'm almost certain he was an Italian. And again, he had a monopoly for about 20 years in the 16th century. And again, he's considered to be the father of music printing. So the Copyright Act of 1831 was the first US copyright for musical composition. So prior to that, music wasn't really protected. So in 1831, the US started to provide some protection to musical composition in 1831 again. So that's the Copyright Act of 1831. So Stephen Foster was the first US songwriter. He's famous for writing songs like "Oh Susanna," "Don't You Cry for Me," right? Don't get me to sing because I'm a terrible singer. But anyway, so he's famous for writing that song, "Oh Susanna, Don't You Cry for Me." So he is considered to be the first sort of prolific U.S. songwriter, and he died poor. Right, going back to the inability of the copyrights to really have much teeth or much penalty for people who infringed on copyrights. It wasn't really. It was hard to really legislate. So essentially, Stephen Foster, when he died, I think he died with, he hit his head and he got sick, and I think he had 38 cents in his pocket when he died. I believe he had 38 cents because he lived to be the age of 38, and so he had a penny for every he had a cent for every year that he lived, and I believe he died at the age of 38 when after he hit his head. He cut his neck, and then he just essentially, I guess, bled to death. I believe. Not sure if the cut on the neck or the fever that he had killed him, one or the other. Not sure. Anyways, Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo is considered to be the person who really spearheaded the idea of the Berne Convention of 1886. And so the Berne Convention essentially becomes the first international agreement on copyrights. So again, Victor Hugo spearheaded the idea of the Berne Convention of 1886. And essentially what the Berne Convention does of 1886 is provides the first international agreement for copyrights. Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison produced, or I should say invented, the phonograph, which reproduces sound. So this is a picture of the phonograph, as you can see here. And so I believe that if you turn that lever on the right-hand side, it reproduced music. So as you can see, it cost $30, at least this image that I have here. $30 is a lot of money back then. So again, Thomas Edison helped to invent it, I should say, the phonograph. So Emil Berliner invented the flat disc. And so this is what I mean by the flat disc. So essentially it's sort of like, a big, I don't know if you guys remember the CDs, right? Or even like a sort of like a vinyl album of sorts. So this is the disc record that Berliner basically invented. And so he also invented something called the gramophone. The gramophone is a device where you put this flat disc on top of it and it would play. So if you see this gramophone, right, you can see here, you lay down the record album, or the disc, I should say, on top of the gramophone, set down the needle and wind it, and it would play music. And so Berliner also was one of the first people to really sort of develop an early recording company, and later on got bought out or merged with Columbia Records. So again, ASCAP and BMI was developed to sort of help protect copyrights by monitoring public performances. And so the idea behind ASCAP and BMI, right, was that there's no way that an artist can keep track of how often their music was being used, right, by other artists that were covering it, or by radio stations that were playing it, or whatever. There's no way to really legislate that or to keep track of that. And so the whole point of ASCAP and BMI was that what it does is that if anybody, let's say, decides to cover your music, so that particular venue is supposed to be paying a blanket license. And that blanket license goes to ASCAP and BMI. So essentially it grants permission for that music venue to, whoever wants to cover whatever music, it's okay because the venue's already paid a blanket license. Let's just say that it's just at a random event. Let's say there's a concert in the street. And so in this particular case, right, there's a concert in the street. Let's just say that that the manager knows that the artist is going to cover, XYZ song. And so the manager or the special events person is supposed to get a public performance rights license. That's permission to use somebody else's music. So just in case that song, right, gets recorded and gets put up on YouTube, then, that artist isn't going to get in trouble. So the other part of ASCAP and BMI, they also work very closely with television networks and cable networks and radio stations. So anytime you hear, songs being played on the radio or on TV stations or cable networks, they're all paying ASCAP and BMI for permission to use this music, again, under what they call a blanket license. So Campbell and Acroft Rose Music, this is a really important Supreme Court case regarding Two Live Crew. They covered a song, a Roy Orbison song, and Acroft and Rose was the music publisher of the Roy Orbison song. And so Two Live Crew essentially made a parody of this particular song. And Acroft Rose Music actually sues Campbell for not getting permission to use Roy Orbison's music. Campbell, on the other hand, was arguing that this was a parody. He doesn't really need permission if it's a parody. And so this argument went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's a real famous Supreme Court case.
I was fighting for what we have today. It was like, this thing is really political. They really want to get rid of hip hop. People didn't get it, but I did. I had a gift of taking songs and switching them up and making what we wanted to make it. For instance, I'll give you one, Pretty Woman. I said to the guys, hey guys, we got to do this Pretty Woman song. So I'm going like, oh, pretty woman. One of the guys was like, big hairy woman. So we were like going back and forth and it became a joke. And I was like, okay, look, I got to do this. I had to call my licensing people and my licensing people had to call Roy Orbison Publishing Company, which is Acroft Rose, to get a license or permission to release the version of that song. But then my lawyer said, okay, it's a parody. That's protected by the First Amendment. So you don't really necessarily need a license. You can just go ahead and do what you gotta do. And we actually did the song. But I'm gonna tell you, that thing got us in a whole lot of trouble. These people from the PMRC came, the Parents Music Resource Center. Tipper Gore was rolling with this crew of girls, and they were hardcore. They were calling everybody, trying to tear me down from limb to limb. The PMRC went and contacted Roy Orbison estate, and they said, oh, how could you let the Two Live Crew do a parody of Pretty Woman? We're gonna get people to boycott Roy Orbison records. You need to stop the Two Live Crew. You need to sue them. I got served the papers on a golf course. Hey, Mr. Campbell, you're being sued by Roy Orbison estate. Okay, buddy, just throw it in the golf cart. I'll give it to my lawyers. Roy Orbison publisher, go and sue us. And they won one hearing. And we win a hearing. And they get to appeal. And it just keeps getting bounced back and forward. And then it gets kicked to the Supreme Court. And I'm like, I'm in the Supreme Court? A rapper? Are you serious? And that was just amazing to just go in there and see these justices presiding over my case. They would sit down in the chairs and I felt like an ant. I felt like the smallest person in the room. And Acroft Rose lawyer, they grilled him so bad, the guy was having a meltdown. Then my lawyer, Bruce Rogo, stands up there looking like old Abe Lincoln. He had been there to the Supreme Court quite a few times. But the most amazing part of it was when they said, okay, we have some briefs filed against Mr. Campbell by Michael Jackson. I was like, oh, that's my hero. Michael Jackson filed a brief against me? When they issued the ruling, I was totally numb for the whole entire day. I was like, what just happened? Are you serious? Mm-hmm. Did I just win in the Supreme Court? I went in the back room and actually started crying. It was emotional for me. If I would have lost that case, not only would it have affected hip-hop, but it also would have affected shows like Saturday Night Live, The Chappelle Show. All of them could have been sued. My case set precedent. It's the #1 case that they use right now today for parodies on the internet. You know, like intellectual property. That's parody. That's protected by the First Amendment. That was my whole thing. I was fighting for what we have today.
So obviously, as you can see here, right, Two Live Crew or Campbell wins the Supreme Court case. This is what makes, parody, equals fair use. You can go ahead and make fun of whoever you want, right, on YouTube or wherever you want. So makes parodies, protected speech. So let's talk a little bit about sync licenses and master use licenses, and I'll give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. So we'll talk about Perfect Picture, or Pitch Perfect, I should say, and we'll talk about Bohemian Rhapsody. So we'll talk about Bohemian Rhapsody first. Now, this is an example of going to be, in this particular case, right, I'm not sure how much this actor actually lip-synced Freddie Mercury's voice. I'm guessing maybe a little bit, but certainly couldn't, match Freddie Mercury's voice, at least not entirely. So in this particular case, right, because you are using the master recording of Queen, right, plus the composition, right, the lyrics, this is going to be an example of master use license. So again, this is an example of the use of a master use license, right? Because again, you're using the master recording of the artist as well as with the lyrics, and you're syncing it with the images, right? So I still remember this On a side note, I still remember watching this concert when I was a kid, being completely blown away.
Song's about sex.
Sex? Nah, 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 come on. Nah, 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 come on, come on, come on. 'Cause I may be bad, but I'm perfectly good. Sex in the air, I don't care, I understand. My sticks and stones may break my bones, but chains and whips excite me. I may be bad, come on, I like it,
Sex, baby, let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex.
All right.
Let's talk about sex.
A little bit.
Let's talk about sex,
baby.
baby.
All through the night I'll make love to you like you want me to.
And I guess this is the woman in you that brings out the man in me. I know I can't help myself. You're all in the world to me. It feels like the first time. It feels like the very first time. It feels like the first time.
It's going down. Fade to Blackstreet, the homies got Abby Collab Creations, bump like acne, no doubt. I put it down, never slouch. As long as my credit could vouch, a dog couldn't catch me straight up. Tell me who can stop when Dre making moves, attracting honeys like a magnet, giving them orgasms with my mellow accent. Still moving the flavor with the homies Blackstreet and Teddy, the original Rump Shakers.
Keep going.
Shorty get down, good lord. Woo! Baby got 'em open all over town. Strictly bitch, she don't play around. Cover much ground, got game by the pound. Getting paid is a forte, each and every day to play away. I can't get her out of my mind. Oh, wow.
Okay.
I like the way you work it, no diggity. I gotta bag it up, baby. I like the way you work it.
All right, so this is an example of synchronization, right? Because you have, in this particular case, you know, actors and actresses that are covering the song. So all they're using in this particular movie, right, is just the compositions, right? They're covering them. There's no master recordings. It's just the composition. And they're syncing the composition with the images. This is why you need a synchronization license, because you're syncing the composition, right, with the image being the movie. So hopefully these two examples make it kind of clear, or make it clear the difference between when you would use a master use license versus when you would use a synchronization license. There's actually kind of within the film industry, there's actually a person who does, their job is to do clearances, right? They clear the rights to use all sorts of things like music, for instance. Okay, so a music group, you have to think about a music group as being two divisions. One is the recording division, which is on the left-hand side, and one is the publishing division, which is on my right-hand side. So again, this is the recording division, this is the publishing division. So in the recording division, they work with the recording artists. They discover talent, they help to develop that talent, that recording artist talent. They also produce the recordings of that musical talent. They help to market and promote the recordings as well as possible, whether that means it's on social media or trying to get them promoted on, you know, various publications, obviously through touring. They also sell and distribute recordings. So they work with platforms that distribute recordings to, let's say, big box stores, the ones that still sell music. And so they're the responsible for paying the recording artist. On my right-hand side, we have the publishing division. So the publishing division works with songwriters. So it discovers and develops songwriters. And so these songwriters are responsible for obviously writing lyrics to music. They own the copyrights to these musical compositions, right? So they control essentially the mechanical licenses to these compositions. So the the label, right, or the publishing division of the music group is essentially promotes and administers the copyrights to musical compositions to be used, let's say, on another recording. It's going to be used on public performances. You got to pay the publisher. If you're going to use the music in movies or television, you got to pay the publisher. If you're going to use it in a video game, you got to pay the publisher. If you're going to use it in advertisements or any way possible that you're going to use somebody's composition, you got to pay the publisher. And so they pay the songwriters. So again, recording division pays the recording artist, the publishing division pays the songwriter. So how does music pre-production and production work? So it can simply be as simple as a music rep, right? An A&R rep, I should say, that represents you. And they may just, represent your band, because they say they like your band, they want to represent your band, and they may submit a demo of your band, right? Or it could be just that a band already has a demo in place, and then they give the demo to the A&R rep. So there's really no standard way that music works. It's not necessarily like movies or like TV programs, but it all starts essentially with an A&R rep, right? An A&R rep decides to represent you, number one. And that representing may mean that he or she, right, asks you for a demo. And so he or she's going to submit a demo on your behalf. Or, right, they're just going to say, we're going to represent you. Maybe you're a broke band and you don't have any money. And so we're just going to represent your band. Or I am going to be your artist, your A&R rep, and I am going to vouch for you and get you signed onto this particular label. So the way it works, and again, this is non-linear order when it comes to the production of music. I'm just talking about the main facets of pre-production and production. So hopefully this makes sense. So it starts obviously with, well, maybe not so obvious. It starts with with songwriting. This is where, let's just say if you don't have a demo, right, which is basically you're demonstrating what you can do on a demo. It starts with songwriting. This is where the demo production begins, and also the recording process begins. And even if you go back further than that a little bit, right? Even before you begin the demo and the recording, it may start with, you have an idea, maybe a lyric popped into your head, or a melody popped into your head, or some sort of chord progression popped into your head, and that convinces you to, or it wakes you up in the middle of the night, and you work and build off of that lyric, or you build off that melody, or you end up building off of that chord progression. And so it starts with the songwriting, right? That's where the demo and the recording begins with songwriting. And oftentimes the songwriting begins with the lyric, some sort of melody, some sort of chord progression. And then as you progress, right, you start thinking about, how am I going to arrange this particular song, right? Are you going to add tempo or make it faster? You're going to slow down the tempo, or you're going to add voices? How are you going to add or arrange the instruments within that particular song? Then you have tracking. Tracking is so it's so monotonous. So basically, tracking is where it's the recording of the instruments, right? You have the engineer in the studio, and you're laying down tracks. So you can, the drummer can spend, I don't know, few hours laying down various tracks for the engineer. And the whole point of laying down tracks is the engineer or the music producer is going to find the best track that's laid down by the drummer. Same thing applies to the person who's the bass player, or if you have somebody who's playing the saxophone, whatever instrument, whatever member of the band is playing whatever instrument, they lay down tracks. And then basically there's then the editing of these different takes, right, or tracks. And the whole point of editing, again, this is where the engineer comes in. Maybe it's the music producer. You try to eliminate, somebody's breathing. You try to eliminate all the errors that occurred while they were recording the song. If there was poor tuning, if there's some timing issues, you fix it all in the editing process. And then comes along the mixing, where you combine all of the elements together, the instrument volumes. This is where you have to have an incredible ear for music. I personally don't. So this is where you combine all the elements. And again, it's very important to have a great ear for this. And then you master it. Mastering is the songs or the album's final version. It's important because you want the album to essentially have a sound similar across the board, and generally that's what you want. That's the ideal goal when it comes to mastering. So other important elements, of course, rehearsal, right? You got to practice. So the whole idea of rehearsal is trying to get in sync with the other band members. Other important elements, of course, there's coaching. This is where the music producer is incredibly important, because the producer oftentimes coaches the singer and the musician. This is where the credibility and the quality of the producer really comes out in the coaching of the band, the coaching of the singer, the coaching of the musicians, the coaching of the engineer. Sweetening. The sweetening is where you add elements, whether it's the drums or the electronic guitar in post-production. So I'll talk about this shortly, and also talk about what a producer does and how it's different than an engineer. The next thing that goes along with this is, song selection. Which song will be on the album? And so sometimes, right, sometimes the artists, who they have enough power, they can determine which songs are going to go in this particular album. Sometimes the artist doesn't have that kind of power, and then the label's going to decide which songs are going to go into this album. So after the songs have been decided, right, this is going to go on the album, they start printing copies, and this is where the music producer has to understand all these kind of different contracts that are going to be have to get signed, whether it's the master recording contracts, distribution contracts, there's all sorts of contracts, and then that song or album drops, which drops means premiere or debut. So this next couple of slides are going to explain what exactly is the duty of an engineer versus the duty of a music producer.
Hey, what's up? It's Wick for Wikimedia, and today we're talking about studio roles. So we're going to take a look at the differences between a producer and an audio engineer. The last 20 or 30 years, a lot has changed in the studio, and we're going to be taking a look at the traditional roles of a producer and an audio engineer, and then we're going to take a look at how this translates to the modern producer. A producer oversees the overall production process. He usually gets his projects from the record label. In many cases, the producer is also responsible for the budget of an album. This budget gets decided by or approved by the record label. But a producer can also be heavily involved in the creative side of things. He then looks at the songs that the band already has for the project, and he can decide if they need more music or more lyrics, and he can even have a direct influence on the song. So the producer then can have influence on the song structure, on the key, on the tempo, and sometimes even on the lyrics. So many producers have got a great musical background and knowledge. In many cases, the producer is also responsible for planning the rehearsal sessions and the recording sessions. In many cases, the producer can also decide in which studio he wants to work and how many days that the studio needs to be booked. A good producer is always present during the rehearsal sessions, where he can still have some influence on the song or maybe lyrics or the way that something is sang. The producer is always present during the recording sessions in the studio. A good producer always has a great ear for songs, structure, and mixes, and sounds in general. He also knows how things should sound in his opinion and how to create that sound. The good producers know a lot about audio equipment and how to use it. He knows exactly which compressor he wants on which vocal to create a certain sound, and in many cases the producer is able to perform the mix himself. So let's take a look at how the audio engineer comes into play here. An audio engineer usually works for a studio, and he knows all the ins and outs of the studio, literally. An audio engineer knows which gear there is, which microphones, how many cables, how the patch bay works. He knows everything inside the studio. He can also be the one plugging in the microphones, doing the microphone checks and setting up the tape machine. In many cases, the audio engineer operates all the gear, the console, and he operates the record button. In some cases, he directly performs all the tasks for the producer, so then the producer asks him to, can you lower the fader on channel 13? Insert the LA2A on track 5. So he's really hands-on doing the task for the producer the way that the producer hears it. And even though there are still a lot of studios working like this, a lot has changed in the last 20 years. We've seen a huge growth in home studios due to MIDI equipment and synthesizers, allowing people to actually produce and record music from their home studio. So a producer nowadays can actually be a one-man army, and he often can be the artist, the producer, the audio engineer, the designer, the promoter, and he can independently release his records, so he doesn't even need a record label. He can work from his own home studio or small project studios, and he can even compete with the high quality of high-end production facilities. Nowadays we've got great audio interfaces with really good analog to digital conversion, and we've got high-end equipment available which normally was only available to really big studios. I hope I could clarify the differences between an audio engineer and a producer a little bit for you guys today. If you got any questions, you can always post them down here. And you guys should be checking out Dave Grohl's SoundCity.com.
So right now we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of sweetening. So the idea of adding elements, we're going to talk about that right now. This is a good example of sweetening. So Simon and Garfunkel. This is Simon and Garfunkel. I don't know if you know who this is. So great duo, right? They sang this song, "Sound of Silence," and this is the Sound of Silence without sweetening.
We're very happy to be here on your TV program Twin in Holland, and we would like to do now a song. It's called "Sounds of Silence." Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. And instantly I walk along narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turn my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touch the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw.
Okay, so as you can hear, the Simon and Garfunkel The Sound of Silence. It's a great song in my personal opinion, but Columbia Records didn't particularly like. They liked the song, but they felt that it lacked, I guess, pop, right? And so as you can see here, they just had, Simon and Garfunkel, and they had one acoustic guitar. And so basically Columbia Records decides to sweeten the song, right? Again, they decide to sweeten the song without asking for permission from Simon and Garfunkel. They create a version of this song. So they added elements to this song to give it, I guess, more pop, I suppose it's the right word, or to sweeten it. It is called sweetening. So this is the version that Columbia Records decides to, or the elements they decide to add into the Simon and Garfunkel song, and hopefully you can notice a difference, primarily the drums that you're going to hear in the background.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp. When my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light, split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking.
So hopefully you can see the difference between the first version of the Simon and Garfunkel song, The Sounds of Silence, versus this one. Again, Columbia Records decides to sweeten the song to give it more pop. And essentially this becomes an enormous hit for Simon and Garfunkel. I'm not sure if they were really happy with the fact that Columbia Records decided to sweeten their song without their permission, but they did it anyways, and it ended up becoming a huge hit. So hopefully you were able to notice the added elements that were incorporated into the song to give it, I guess, more pop.